Welcome, everybody. So glad you can join us for this webinar on social enterprise, one in a series sponsored by the Community Partnership Forum, a wonderful collaboration of government, nonprofit, and business groups in the DMV. Here to welcome us and say a little bit more about the Community Partnership Forum is Paul Kohlenberger from the Greater McLean Chamber of Commerce. Paul?
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this installment of the 13th Annual Community Partnership Forum Speaker Series. As Alan said, I serve as president of the Greater McLean Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the forum's host and members of the planning committee, I welcome you to the fourth session of our multi-part speaker series on how we together can move forward with purpose to build a better and stronger post-COVID DMV region. Continuing what we began in March, we will examine how we can build a more equitable, more inclusive, and more resilient region. We will continue to engage various voices, experts, and you to envision how we can get there together. The Greater McLean Chamber and our partners continue to focus on closing the gap of inequities in health, education, and economic opportunity, especially as it relates to these impacts of the pandemic. If the past year has shown us anything, it is that we have work to do to ensure residents and households are part of an inclusive community that brings prosperity and opportunity to all. Now, our partners separately have approached this from a variety of angles, and the Chamber is delighted to thank and honor them for their work and participation on this series. Partners are the Schar School at George Mason University, United Way of the National Capital Area, the McLean Chamber, Fairfax County Office of Economic Initiatives, Northern Virginia Family Service, Bright Paths, Leadership Fairfax, the ARC of Northern Virginia, the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia, and Volunteer Fairfax. Today, we've prepared for you an exciting panel who will speak to innovations in corporate and nonprofit governance. In the next several months, we will round out our series with first a session on July 13th, Putting Purpose Over Profit, that will examine the economics of mutuality. It's a groundbreaking approach to holistic management. Finally, we will have a session exploring our community's call to action and how we each have a role in creating an economy of, by, and for all individuals in the DMV. It is now my honor and pleasure to reintroduce to you, to moderate this session, Dr. Alan Abramson.
Thank you, Paul. And it has been a great pleasure to work with our partners. It's been a wonderful cross-sector collaboration that is been involved in putting together, I think this is the 13th annual Community Partnership Forum. So we've been excited about the important partnership in developing this series. Our topic today is social enterprise, or there really isn't even agreed upon jargon labels to call this activity. What it is at heart, I think of, is double or triple bottom line activity. That is, organizations that are seeking both to do good in some way, as well as use a earned revenue model. Organizations can approach this either from the nonprofit sector, nonprofits obviously doing good, but also drawing on earned revenue in some cases to advance their mission. So organizations can come from the nonprofit sector, or they can come from the for-profit sector. Businesses that are exceptionally devoted to doing good, that go beyond the sort of corporate social responsibility that perhaps most businesses do in some way or another, but businesses that really prioritize doing good. So it's a real mix of organizations that are involved in this social enterprise, hybrid, double bottom line activity. In fact, some would say that our current efforts to force organizations to choose their sector is part of the problem. And that what we really need is to think about new legal categories so that organizations aren't forced to be either nonprofit or for-profit. And in fact, many states have started adopting those kinds of new new categories. And Alicia Plairhoppels, one of our panelists, I think will talk in particular about that, about what's been going on in Virginia related to that kind of development. So we've got a great panel lined up. Really excited about our panel members. We'll start with Hirad Sabeti, who will provide some background on social enterprise, or what he calls the fourth sector for benefit organizations. Then we'll move to Lori Wexler from Sunflower Bakery, who will tell us what it is actually to be involved in running one of these enterprises. And then to Alicia Plairhoppels from Georgetown Law School, who will talk about policy changes, law changes, what's been going on in the DMV, particularly Virginia, I think, and what we might look for in the future. So each speaker will talk for we'll start off with each speaker talking for about 10 minutes or so, and then invite your questions at any point in our conversation. Please use the Q&A chat, the Q&A box probably at the bottom of your screen, and we'll feed those questions to the panelists when they're done speaking. So why don't we get started? We'll start with Hirad, again providing some background on this hybrid sector, this social enterprise fourth sector. Hirad is a co-founder and CEO of the Fourth Sector Group. For more than 25 years, Hirad has been working on a variety of national and international initiatives to accelerate the development of the fourth sector. Hirad?
Thank you so much, Alan. Honored to be back at the forum, and delighted. Thank you. Grateful for the invitation. Delighted to be with everyone. So, as Alan said, I'm just going to do a quick overview, looking at the social enterprise landscape from kind of a bird's eye perspective, both in terms of the sort of landscape of activity that has been going on really for decades, giving rise to this space, but also how it sort of sits within the broader context of how our economies are structured. So I'm going to use a few slides to help facilitate talking through this stuff. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's see. So basically, if you zoom back and look at the current economic system that we're operating in, basically it comprises of three sectors, three dominant sectors. The public sector, sorry, these slides aren't moving very quickly. So the public sector, which is government, the private sector, which is business, and the nonprofit sector, which is the third sector of the economy. The public sector, as we know it, the sort of modern form of government, dates back many hundreds of years. The private sector, the architecture, the current architecture of business, for-profit business, and what we consider the private sector, dates back about 3 or 4 centuries. And the nonprofit sector in the last 50 to 100 years has basically sort of taken hold, the current model. And these architectures didn't appear out of nowhere. They're basically a response to how human beings have been organizing activity in society, and they basically sort of are a way to institutionalize dominant forms of activity. So the private sector, which, sorry for the back and forth on these slides, but the private sector, or actually each of the three sectors, has a supportive ecosystem around it: the public policy environment, the financial markets that support it, the education and training system that develops the workforce, the technical assistance providers of all sorts, and ways we measure and report performance. All of these things are basically elements of a supportive ecosystem. And the way that the sort of financial flows work between the three sectors is that business activity, or the private sector, basically generates the revenues by selling goods and services in the economy that end up funding government through taxation, and they fund the nonprofit sector directly and indirectly, through philanthropic proceeds. So business has an outsized influence financially over the other sectors. And business as it's conducted now, basically, like I said, dates back several centuries, where we've institutionalized or formalized our system of trade in a way that basically is centered on profit maximization. So basically, we sell goods and services to maximize profit, and that makes the wheel of the economy turn and generates the tax revenues and generates the salaries and generates the philanthropic proceeds. But the problem is that the way we organize business also, because it's so centered on profit, it basically sees people and planet as costs. And those are costs to be minimized. So as economists talk about it, businesses end up externalizing social and environmental costs in favor of financial performance. And so those costs end up generating lots and lots of problems, like climate change, like inequality, loss of biodiversity, and so on, that end up basically increasing over time. So the more this engine of the economy turns, the more it's generating these negative externalities or challenges that government and philanthropy are left to try to fix, but they don't get the resources they need anywhere remotely close to the level of resources required to address those costs. So over time, this three-sector model that we have is basically heading us off a number of important cliffs. So we're in this suicide economy that's been basically structured the way it has for several centuries. And in the last few decades, we've seen all kinds of people trying to respond to it in a myriad of ways. So one major pattern of response that we see is, if you look at organizations, the landscape of organizations, by the way, by their purpose, they fall on this spectrum between those that maximize profit for their owners. That's where the for-profit businesses are, the private sector. Those that exist to maximize social benefit for basically the public. That's where nonprofits and governments are. This is the three-sector traditional structure that we've become used to. For decades, what we've seen is lots of innovation where for-profit businesses are essentially broadening their purpose to take on social and environmental value creation. So in the 70s, this was the ethics movement. In the 80s, it was corporate social responsibility, or CSR. In the 90s, it was sustainability, and then shared value. And in the last decade, there's been a big emphasis on purpose in business. So it's a huge movement of movements that we've seen growing for decades. The other mega trend, basically, if you look at organizations by how they generate their income, for-profit businesses fall on the left side, where they earn their income through exchange of goods and services, nonprofits and government on the right, where they rely on contributed income through tax and charity. For decades, what we've seen is those two sectors moving to the left, basically towards market-based approaches, trying to leverage the markets and business practices to become more effective, more efficient, more scalable, and more accountable, and so on. So these are the huge trends we've seen in the organizational landscape for decades. And if you look at these relative to each other, what you see is in the top left space, organizations, this is all organizations in the economy, basically. In the top left space, you've got organizations whose purpose is to maximize profit for owners, relying on earned income through market exchange. That's where for-profit firms are concentrated, and hence the private sector. In the bottom right, you've got organizations whose purpose is to generate public benefit, but rely on contributed income, tax and charity. That's where governments and nonprofits are. And that, again, is a three-sector structure of the economy. And these are the vectors of change we've seen the last few decades. More and more for-profit businesses basically moving to the right, trying to take on social and environmental value creation, broadening their sense of purpose. More and more nonprofits and government moving up this sort of spectrum of income, trying to generate or become more effective and efficient and through market-based engagement. So this is the big patterns of change we've seen. At the same time, there's a whole nother emergence, basically, that we witnessed, which is new models of organization being formed at the nexus of purpose and market, if you will, or profit. So the purpose of a nonprofit married with the commercial metabolism of a for-profit. And this is giving rise to an emerging fourth sector, the economy, just like the other three sectors were formed and formalized at a time when there was a bunch of organizational activity that needed to be institutionalized to get to scale and be held accountable and so on. That's now happening with the fourth sector. So the fourth sector is all kinds of different models. There's community wealth organizations, common good corporations, social enterprises, sustainable businesses, tribal enterprises, faith-based enterprises, and so on. Lots of different variations on the theme, just like we have more than 40 different types of nonprofits recognized in federal law in the US. We're going to eventually have multiple types of for-benefit, which is a sort of a generic term for the fourth sector, as the nonprofit is a generic term for the third sector. We're going to have lots of different models of for-benefits emerging and recognized in policy over time. And this is sort of basically a skeletal definition of what for-benefits are. So they're distinguished from the other three dominant, from business, government, and nonprofits by the first two characteristics. They all have a social purpose as their primary sort of mandate, and social or environmental purpose, and they all have a substantially earned income revenue. So purpose of nonprofit, the metabolism of a business. In addition to that, some of them have distributed ownership models. Some of them have distributed governance models where the stakeholders are given more rights of governance. Some of them have fair compensation standards. They have reasonable returns where investors are basically satisfied enough to garner their investment, but the balance of the profits go back towards the purpose. Some have standards for social and environmental responsibility, transparency, which is triple bottom line reporting, and protected assets. So the assets are locked in towards for the purpose, the way nonprofits, the way they are in nonprofits. So this is just basically a landscape of what's been emerging. At the same time, as I mentioned, each of the three formal sectors has a supportive ecosystem around it. We've also seen for decades the emergence of a new ecosystem around the fourth sector. So public policy has been shifting. As Alan mentioned, a number of states have passed new legal forms legislation to start to recognize these new kinds of hybrid entities. We've seen financial markets evolve, social investing, venture, philanthropy, impact investing, lots of innovations happening in financial markets. We've seen new types of metrics being developed that are basically triple bottom line as opposed to single bottom line, taking into account social and environmental value creation and so on. So for decades, everywhere along this ecosystem, we've seen innovations happening. And all of this stuff is basically at a scale much bigger than many of us recognize. Somewhere on the order of 10% of GDP before COVID would have been in the fourth sector where it formalized that way. So there's quite a lot of activity. And there was a study that showed the job growth rate in the fourth sector was twice what it is than in the private sector pre-COVID. So lots of engagement and activity, and there are a lot of studies that show overwhelmingly human beings, when they're surveyed either as consumers, as investors, as entrepreneurs, as employees, in any capacity, there's a massive, basically, demand signal for that's oriented towards these for-benefit approaches. So people would rather align their economic choices with their values when they're given a choice to do so. So that is basically an overview of the fourth sector. I think I will pause there and hand it back to you, Alan, to move us to the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Hirad. Great foundation for our discussion today. We'll next hear from Lori Wexler, who's Executive Director and co-founder of Sunflower Bakery, which is based in Bethesda and Rockville, Maryland. Sunflower is a nonprofit that provides job training and employment opportunities in the baking and hospitality industries for adults with learning differences. And Lori will talk about her experience with sunflower, and I hear it's I have wonderful baked goods come out of the bakery, is what I hear. So thanks so much for joining us, Lori.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. And I just want to welcome everyone to our location to visit us in Rockville. We're here Monday through, actually Sunday, mostly Monday through Friday. And you also can find us online, sunflowerbakery.org, to learn more about our training programs and to purchase some delicious desserts. Anyway, I think I'm now convinced that we're a fourth sector organization. So that's interesting. I might have more to learn there. But we really created this organization in 2009 to match a public need, which was to provide skilled employment training to young adults with learning differences. So that was the public need. And the idea was to also the whole time have a meet a market need, a consumer market need, which was for kosher, non-dairy, delicious kosher, non-dairy desserts. Because in wanting to offer pastry arts as what the skilled training would be, we would want people to be able to work on have a real training, on the job training. That was always the idea, that we would provide training, which is now a 6-month program, which includes a lot of on the job training in there, and then put people, help them into positions in the community where they would utilize their skills. So part of our model was part of what they would be training on are the orders that came into the bakery. And that was kind of what we started working on. That's still our signature program. We've expanded a lot in terms of our customer base, in terms of the people we're serving with our training programs. We added a hospitality program. We have a cafe also in Bethesda that was the genesis of the hospitality program, which is basically an opportunity for individuals who are interested in more of a front of the house experience to have that kind of training. So we're offering the back of the house and the front of the house. I would say, going back a little bit organizationally and structurally, how we did it, we found a model. We went down and visited a model. It was in Virginia Beach, of a program that was offering employment training and had a earned revenue component to it, the way we wanted to do that. Our budget right now is very much, it's about 53% earned revenue, and the remainder is unearned. So we're very much living in that fourth sector realm, I think. And we have found from our donors that they're very happy and feel very good about being involved with an organization that is not 100% dependent on donations, that we have this other piece to it. So that's always been a very, very good thing. I will say we did a market study at the time through American University's business school to make sure that the market sector that we were going to go after was the correct one for us. So that was very helpful. We brought in a lot of people on the ground with us, disability professionals, educators, community leaders, donors, people in Montgomery County government. We're obviously in Montgomery County. So we really set the stage very early to have a lot of buy-in for what we were doing. We were all, except for hiring a part-time, very part-time professional pastry chef, everyone was a volunteer for about the first 2 years, which brings its own challenges for people who want to create organizations such as ours, but also need to be earning money, to sustain themselves and their families at the same time. So that's an area, I think, for work that needs to be focused on a little bit to make it possible for people to do it. Right now, in terms of talking a little bit about the need, on average in the DMV, about 30% of people with cognitive disabilities, ages 18 to 64, are employed. So 70% are not employed. So that was the need. We knew there was a big need. Montgomery County was really desperate to have an organization such as ours, and they would welcome a lot more. And I know that every county would welcome more organizations that are addressing this need to train young adults with a range of abilities. Everyone's got a range of abilities and disabilities as we grow. And so they were very, very excited to be able to support an organization that was directly addressing this. And the idea for us and why it's such a community effort is that we work with the schools, disability agencies, state of Maryland, the county, to bring people into our program on one side. We train them, and then we work with the business community to get them hired. So it's very much a very inclusive, in all senses of that word, operation. Let's see what else. There's so many things. I will say, just logistically, we started in donated space in a synagogue where we would go a couple of afternoons a week. 4 people put in $500 each. And last night we passed a budget that exceeds $1.4 million. So we've come a long way in 12 years. We were at our location for about 7.5 months before it got to be too small. And we found a small 1,200 square foot place actually in Gaithersburg on Craigslist. And we lived there for 10.5 years until we moved to our new place, which is about 5,700 square feet in Rockville last January, which is great timing, because without this new space, we would not have survived COVID for sure, because people would not have been able to work in such a small environment together. So we're very, very lucky to have that. I will also say that in terms of how we started, I personally took a lot of classes on doing financials, because I did not know how to do that. I come from the nonprofit world, but I did not know about building something from scratch. My colleagues were people from the disability world. So that I had that as well. And we were really very, very careful to not expand too quickly, to know what we could handle. Let's see what else I want to tell you. We did the pilot. We partnered with a disability agency, and we got a cohort of students, adult students, who came to us and who helped us to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So we had a lot of this trial before we instituted a real program the following year after starting. What else can I share? In terms of donors, we started early on with talking to individuals, as I said, local foundations, county government. Our product, we would make it and we would give it away. We gave it away we started in June. So by September, and it became the Jewish holidays, we just made platters and gave them away to synagogues. And those were the places that started purchasing from us. We made pretty packages, made a list of community leaders and donors, and had volunteers go to their homes and deliver a package with a small card telling them about us. Created a board of directors, obviously. We did all the paperwork that was involved in becoming a 501c3. And that's kind of brought us to where we are right now. I don't want to speak too long. I don't know what I've missed. In case, Alan, if there's anything that you would like me to focus on further.
Sure, that's great. Thank you, Lori. We'll come back and ask you a couple questions in a minute, but thanks so much for that terrific on the ground view of what it is to run a social enterprise. And again, we invite your questions in the please use the Q&A function, and we'll get to them after we hear from our third speaker, Alicia Plairhoppels, who is a professor in the law school at Georgetown University and director of the law school's Social Enterprise and Nonprofit Law Clinic. She is the author of numerous articles on social enterprise and other topics, and will talk to us today, at least in part, on what's going on in the policy realm and the legal realm vis-a-vis these kinds of hybrid organizations. Alicia?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you also to Paul and the other organizers of the Community Partnership Forum. It was wonderful to hear Harad and Lori speak. Lori, your stories about Sunflower are just really inspiring. Harad, you've done a good job and great job in describing the fourth sector. And as Alan said, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the legal and the policy implications, or I guess how we go about creating a social enterprise ecosystem, or fostering that ecosystem in DC, Maryland, and particularly in Virginia. Legally speaking, I would say that the legal structures are not keeping pace with the fourth sector that Harad has described. A social enterprise or a for-benefit organization can take any organizational form, whether it's going to be a traditional C corporation or a LLC, or the newer organizational forms like the benefit corporation or the worker cooperative, or the charitable form is a nonprofit. And as Harad said, that the key is furthering that social or environmental purpose along with financial returns. In Virginia and elsewhere, social enterprise has certainly had broad bipartisan support, and I think it's because of that promise of financial returns with social and environmental impact. We had in Virginia, the benefit corporation form law was signed into, or bill was signed into law by Republican Governor Bob McDonald, and it was sponsored by a Democratic Senator, Jennifer McClellan. So you can see that bipartisan support that it had early on in 2011. The worker cooperative, which I include in social enterprise as well, because of that structure that the stakeholder governance and the worker employer or the worker owner structure that Harad mentioned before, has that social impact. The worker cooperative law in Virginia just passed much more recently, actually just last year. And along with the nonprofit form, I would say that those are probably the three kind of strongest legal forms for social enterprise in Virginia. In Virginia, it's interesting, we don't actually have nonprofit corporations. We have non-stock corporations, and it actually is a way to facilitate more flexibility in structuring your social enterprise. You still have to follow IRS rules around tax exemption, but the non-stock corporation just gives a little bit more flexibility in how you structure the actual underlying corporation. So I would just say, in terms of what we're seeing with the use of those three things, nonprofits, benefit corporations, worker cooperatives, and what we're seeing here in Virginia is really, this ability to build community wealth. It's taken root most strongly, I would say, in Richmond, in the Richmond area. It certainly has become an up-and-coming space for social entrepreneurship. You've got folks like Virginia Community Capital, which is a CDFI, a Community Development Finance Bank, and a benefit corporation that is doing small business lending around food access, trying to make sure that fund entrepreneurs who are ending food deserts and providing healthy foods to various underserved communities. They're also doing clean energy lending. You also in Richmond have the first ever Office of Community Wealth Building. Is the first ever such entity in any municipality in America, that was established in 2014, and really looking to create that fourth sector, the public-private nonprofit partnerships to address the root causes of poverty and enhance community wealth building. You've also got folks like the Virginia Social Enterprise Alliance, Impact Makers, another benefit corporation that is funding and facilitating social entrepreneurship startups in Richmond. On the worker cooperative side, worker cooperatives have always existed here in Virginia. They most often, though, have been rural and tied to the agricultural industry. And actually, to be honest, not all are worker cooperatives. They're more consumer cooperatives, like cooperatives around consumption of electricity, fuel cooperatives, farm supply cooperatives, and even farm insurance. And so with the development of the worker cooperative law, I would expect that we're going to see a lot more worker cooperatives established here in Virginia. You know, in Alexandria, you've got the Alexandria Union Cab Cooperative, where it's 225 cab drivers who are worker owners for their own cab cooperative. In terms of, you know, how we can facilitate more of these here in Virginia, and actually it would be wonderful to, you know, have more sunflower bakery type organizations here in Virginia. I would say that I think the momentum is behind us, right? The pandemic has certainly inspired us to aggressively pursue alternatives to I guess our current economies. You know, really the pandemic has laid bare the inequities in our current economy, and it showed which communities have suffered the greatest loss of life, have lost their jobs. We're also in the middle of a climate crisis. You know, we can see that proof in the current heat waves in the Pacific Northwest and more intense tropical storms. And so I think just coming out of this pandemic, there's going to be, and we all should be pushing for new investments in rebuilding the economy with an eye towards that fourth sector. A new opportunity is coming up very quickly, and I'll just touch upon this, is that you know, Virginia, the Commonwealth, is receiving $4.3 billion from the American Rescue Plan. That's just the Commonwealth itself. Another $2.9 billion is going to be directed to Virginia counties and cities. And Governor Northam has already laid out priorities for that money around public health, small businesses, workers, public schools, and also bringing broadband to all of Virginia's cities and rural areas. I would like to see, and you know, a push towards, when we're helping small businesses, that we include social enterprises in those businesses. Right now, the targets, I think, for that money are restaurants, hotels, museums, gyms, and theaters. But we need to think really carefully how we can build an inclusive, you know, economy for underserved communities and facilitate social enterprise. Some ideas, and these are not, you know, these are ideas I've generated in my own scholarship, but other ideas that from other groups like the Democracy Collaborative. But, you know, there's a real opportunity for local governments to fund incubators, social enterprise incubators. The Fairfax County Economic Development Authority already works with GMU and sponsors the Mason Enterprise Center. We should be doing those things for social enterprises as well, and creating those public-private partnerships. You know, the technical know-how is so important. As Lori has described, being able to work with, you know, Montgomery County to launch Sunflower Bakery. I think that is, you know, we need the opportunity, the funding, the technical know-how. We offering, you know, classes. Counties should be offering classes around starting social enterprises, starting worker cooperatives, getting to understand you know, the financials of starting such an organization. I just think there's a huge opportunity at this moment. You know, it is certainly a collaborative opportunity between both the public and the private sectors. And I'll end there.
Thank you, Alicia. Great great compliment to, I think we've got a great set of remarks. Hirad's foundational remarks, Lori's sort of on the ground perspective about what it is to run a social enterprise, and Alicia's view of the policy and legal framework for these kinds of activities. So again, I invite your questions in the Q&A function on your screens. And maybe I'll start off with one myself. Maybe Lori might want to start with an answer to this, but perhaps Hirad and Alicia want to weigh in as well, which is practical advice for those considering social enterprise. Folks who may be thinking of starting a whole new enterprise, or even starting an initiative within an existing nonprofit or perhaps for-profit. What do you suggest for those people thinking about social enterprise? Maybe we'll start with Lori.
Sure. I would suggest making sure that your idea is a solid one, and that even though you might think that it's a great idea and your mother or brother or whoever's related to you thinks it's a great idea, you got to go kind of road test it and go out and really talk to the people who you're seeking to serve and other people around them, professionals in the area. You really want to know that what you're looking to accomplish is something that's needed and valuable. And the second thing I would say is to make sure you lay a really strong groundwork in terms of support for what you want to do. And I don't mean just money. I mean, you want community support. You want, from the organizations that may be benefiting from what you do. You want the support of obviously the local governments, whether it's city, state, whatever it is. And you want to go talk to foundations. You want to talk to the places where you may seek funding to see if it's something that they would support. You really want to do your homework before you get yourself involved in something. That's what I would say.
Sounds like good advice to me. Alicia or Hirad, do you want to add? Alicia, I know you mentioned that there are some resources out there, enterprise development centers. And I know I think you help people start social enterprises, perhaps.
Yeah. I would say so. Part of my work is I started the social enterprise and nonprofit law clinic. We provide pro bono legal representation to social enterprise startups and also nonprofits. And I would say, Lori is spot on in terms of, piloting and testing your concept. So the great thing about, I think this space is that you're bringing in the best models or the best practices from both sectors, or, all three sectors to this fourth sector. And so, nobody would start a startup without piloting or testing their concept and making sure that it works and their business model. So when I'm working with social enterprises, that is certainly one of the first things that we vet them for. Is this, don't come to us for legal services, with a model that's actually a business model that's not gonna work. You have to actually test it first. I would say that the resources, once you've got that down, certainly, the legal, in my mind, I'm a lawyer, so, to hammer every nail is the concept, everything is a nail. And so the legal side of things is important as well, as to not get too far ahead of yourself before you figure out that organizational structure that you're going to fit into as well.
While we've got you, we do have a question about the tax implications of a nonprofit getting into social enterprise activities. What what should nonprofits be mindful of as they think about earned revenue opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's certainly at the forefront of my legal work. The nonprofit has to understand that it may be risking its tax exempt status if it's earning too much revenue, or may be facing what's called the unrelated business income tax, which is essentially you're going to be taxed as a business for the earned revenue if it's not directly related and complementary to your to your charitable mission. So that is something, though, that is incredibly technical and also very much dependent on what the type of work that you're doing. And certainly a nonprofit would want to seek legal advice to determine the tax implications of their revenue generating activities.
Thanks. Hira, did you want to add anything in terms of practical advice?
I would totally echo everything that Lori and Alicia said in terms of making sure you got your business model right and you've done your research and market assessment. I will especially, I think, echo the need to make sure the sort of form and function are well matched, meaning you choose an appropriate structure that's suitable to your purpose and to your business model. That's one mistake I see happening a lot. People make early either compromises or they just assume some kind of an off-the-shelf structure, but then ends up hampering them in all kinds of ways down the road. So the more visibility you have about what your real intentions are, a really well done stakeholder assessment is also very important to informing structure. Like, who are all the important stakeholders? What's the value proposition for each one? What are the terms of engagement? What kind of role are they going to have in governance and ownership? How are they participating in the enterprise? And then making sure that you tailor the organization structure to basically all those, how you land on all those variables. And then related to that, I would say make sure that the ecosystem partners that you find are suitable as well to the kind of work that you're trying to do. So make sure that the kind of capital that you seek is well matched to your purpose and your intentions. And the kind of advice that you're seeking, the lawyers that you're talking to, the consultants that you're talking to, the accountants you're talking to, all understand your purpose and the sort of stakeholders you're engaging and your short and long-term intentions, because a mismatch in any of those things I think can lead to long-term consequences that take you off mission or limit your ability to be successful in a whole myriad of ways.
Very helpful, thank you. Another question I would pose relates to implications around equity and race as it relates to social enterprise. One of the sets of issues we're trying to be especially mindful of in our series this year is are questions around equity and race. And I know, for example, at universities, that it is sometimes the students from perhaps wealthier backgrounds who can take a chance around doing social enterprise type work. Lots of students who might be coming out with lots of debt really need to go right into more assured type jobs and not have the chance to be entrepreneurial. But wondering what you see, if anything in terms of the equity issues, racial issues related to social enterprise. Invite any of our panelists to comment on that.
I'll jump in there. So I think that's exactly right, Alan, that there are structural barriers to entrepreneurship generally, and then also barriers for social entrepreneurship, as you've just said. it does take a support system to start any enterprise and to start a social enterprise. And that's where I think that's where we need better partnerships from both the private sector and from government sectors in leveling that playing field for all social entrepreneurs, whether that's creating funding opportunities, fellowship, social enterprise fellowships for entrepreneurs of color, or entrepreneurs from certain communities. Even rural entrepreneurs, I think, have a hard time as well. So creating, I would, again, kind of going back to the American Rescue Plan and, thinking about what this an improved economy could look like. We need those investments in certain communities, whether it's placing the incubators, in underserved communities or at community centers in underserved areas, and welcoming in those that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. I would say too that the major foundations like Skoll and Echoing Green and Ashoka and others that fund social entrepreneurs have been paying particular attention to race and inclusivity. They didn't always do a great job at making sure that those that they funded weren't simply, white men from the East or West Coast, essentially. And so they certainly have done some introspection and trying to broaden the folks that they're funding, social entrepreneurs that they're funding too.
Thanks. Hirad or Lori, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think it's a great area for local foundations to focus on to make funding available. Obviously, it's competitive funding, but that's good. It should be competitive, but to make funding available to a broad range of people purposefully to bring more people into the pool of those who are starting organizations with the social purpose. I think that should be an intentional area. When you go to a foundation's website and you see the different things that they fund, there are different program areas. That should probably be one of them that they start focusing on. And I bet there are several local foundations. We have awesome foundations in the Metro DC area. And that would probably be an area that they would, if they're not thinking about it already, which they may be, to taking that on.
Thank you.
I would just say briefly, Alan, that basically the structural inequities that are increasingly becoming revealed to us, we don't want to basically repeat those errors as we go about formalizing and scaling the fourth sector. So both at the ecosystem level, where we think about the design of public policy, where we think about, access to capital and technical assistance and education and social safety net and so on, all of those things at the ecosystem level need to have an equity lens applied to them as we think about their design. Also at the enterprise level, as people start and structure these kinds of enterprises, having equity as a consideration when we think about governance, when we think about ownership, when we think about the product or service and how it's structured and designed and how accessible it is and so on. That consideration should just be there through and through, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. We have one question and probably Alicia's best position to answer this, and then I think we'll move to wrap up after that. And what I'll do there is I think ask each of our panelists maybe for one takeaway that you'd like the audience to leave our webinar with. So Alicia, you may or may not know the question relates to some of the local Northern Virginia governments, whether they have any specific programs that support the development of social enterprise.
Yeah, and quite unfortunately, I think that our local or regional elected officials are still unfortunately thinking in the silos of the three sectors, government, private, and nonprofit sector. There are great programs out there. The Northern Virginia counties I'm most familiar with, so Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria City, and they have grants, small business development grants. And then they also have nonprofit grants. And of course, any social enterprise could apply for those grants and those fundings, but they're not specifically, to my knowledge, targeted at social enterprise or kind of growing that fourth sector ecosystem. And I think, there's just a lack of awareness and understanding at this point around the fourth sector that we need to advocate. Folks need to advocate for growing amongst our county managers and our elected officials.
Thanks. Well, why don't we, we're moving towards 1:30. Why don't we wrap up our really interesting discussion. Why don't we start with Hirad and then Lori and Alicia. One thing that you'd like folks who are listening in to take away from our discussion today. Hirad?
Thanks, Alan, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here. I would say, we're still in this historic moment where the choices that we make in terms of the economy that we move towards, and as we recover from COVID, is very fluid. It's an open question, and I think if we can elevate the importance of these kinds of models of social enterprise and fourth sector activity as a priority in terms of how we want to divert resources and economic development going forward, I think it's important to do that. And I think that a lot of the challenges we're facing, both on the sort of social side and the environmental side, and even political challenges we're facing, are not going to be solved if we just keep perpetuating the structural flaws of the old system. So this is the moment for us to elevate our voices and roll up our sleeves and try to make a different economic paradigm possible.
Thanks for that call to act now. Lori.
Sure. I'm pretty excited about the fourth sector concept. I had heard about it a little bit, but now it makes a lot of sense. And from our experience, it's definitely what people, I think, want to be part of and want to hear about. My little piece would be just to say, if you have a good idea and you've tested it and you've made sure that it's something that the public is in need of and there's a market for it, as hard as it is, and it is very hard to start something, it is very difficult. It requires a lot of hours and a lot of energy spent in, as Hirad was saying, accounting, finance, legal, all of these realms. The work is really a lot, and it's very, very important. So if you have a good idea and you have the wherewithal to do it, I would do it, and I would advocate the hell out of it and get people on board with you, people who can help, organizations and governments that can help, and individuals, and because we need all the good ideas to become effectuated.
Thanks, Lori, and let's do what we can to help Lori and her good work and sample some of that those sunflower bakery goods. Alicia.
Yeah, I will echo, I guess, some of what I've already said, but I do think that this space, it catches your attention because social enterprise or fourth sector, it catches your eye, right? But it is very hard work, and actually getting all these people to sit down, right? Getting government elected officials, getting private companies, like, for example, Amazon, we've got here in Northern Virginia. I would love to see Amazon be more active in the social enterprise space. They've committed to affordable housing. They've committed to hiring workers, but let's get them to create an incubator for social enterprises, right? So, but that's just to say it's incredibly hard to coordinate all of these various folks and get them to sit down in the same room. And you think that this community partnership forum and the series of discussions you're having is a great way to facilitate that, or at least start that conversation. I appreciate you guys putting this on.
Thank you. Thank you. Some great ideas, some important takeaways. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to my partners in the Community Partnership Forum. And I invite you all to come back on July 13th. Dr. Jay Jacob, formerly of the Mars Corporation, will be talking about the economics of mutuality. We'll see you then, and hope you have a good afternoon and a good holiday. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.